So, last week we discussed Elden Ring Nightreign's 6 returning Dark Souls legacy bosses. And so I figured, coming off the back of that video, why not now take a holistic look at Nightreign's entire slate of night bosses? A huge collection of 27 familiar faces, spanning not just the Dark Souls trilogy, but Elden Ring as well, with one chosen at random from a select pool per expedition for you to face off against at the end of each day, dragged to the battlefield by the knight itself to act as a terrible gatekeeper of sorts as you inch closer towards facing the Night Lord themselves. Since night bosses are being pulled from all corners of the lands between and beyond, there's quite the eclectic mix here, and not every night boss was created equal to begin with. So, in today's video, I'm going to rank all 27 night bosses of Elden Ring Nightreign, from easiest to hardest, based on how they appear in Elden Ring Nightreign specifically. A tiny bit of housekeeping before we begin. I played and completed Nightreign almost exclusively solo, and so the difficulty of these bosses will be from a solo player's perspective. At the same time, while I played and completed expeditions with every single Nightfarer, the vast majority of my game time was spent using Iron Eye. Amazingly, this is the first Souls game to actually get me to enjoy using an archer, so the boss difficulty will again be skewed to using this particular character, though for the night bosses I think a lot of what I have to say will apply universally too. So do please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Which of the night bosses did you find to be the easiest and the hardest when they showed up at the end of each day? And I'd love to know how similar our lists and thoughts actually are. Maybe they are very similar, or perhaps I'm completely off base. Either way, I'd love to get your thoughts down in the comments below, and if you enjoyed today's video and you want to see more from the channel, then consider hitting subscribe as well. It really does make all the difference. But without further ado, let's kick off this list with the absolute easiest night boss of them all. And the easiest night boss in Elden Ring Nightreign comes, unsurprisingly, straight from the original Dark Souls. It's the Centipede Demon. As I mentioned in my previous video, the Centipede Demon feels like a weird pick for Nightreign, to be honest, in that it just doesn't really suit the game at all. The Centipede Demon itself was never difficult. The tricky part of this boss in the original game was navigating the cramped, lava-filled arena that the demon called home. Plucking the Centipede Demon out of that dungeon, that tailor-made dungeon, and dropping it into a sprawling open field that it simply wasn't made for, exposes all of this boss's faults, and completely robs it of any threat whatsoever. Now, what you're left with is a lumbering, slow-moving target that spends most of the battle jumping and constantly turning on the spot to try and keep up with you. Taking off the Centipede Demon's arm, which then begins to crawl around on its own, barely even serves as a distraction. Without a doubt, this monstrosity is the easiest night boss in the game, and when it appears, I mean, you're essentially guaranteed to make it to day 2. And then next up, unsurprisingly, is the other legacy boss from the original Dark Souls, Gaping Dragon. Gaping Dragon is another boss that feels completely out of its element here in Nightreign. It's a massive target that slowly drags itself around the arena, occasionally lashing out with a predictable and heavily telegraphed attack. Maybe it'll swipe at you with its tail, which can be cut off to retrieve a weapon in a nice nod to the original battle, or leap high into the sky, an attack that takes so long to complete that it's unthinkable that anyone should get hit by it. The reason Gaping Dragon ranks slightly higher than the Centipede Demon is really twofold. Firstly, Gaping Dragon has an actual grab attack that, if you are careless enough to get swept up by it, can actually do some damage. And secondly, unlike the Centipede Demon, Gaping Dragon is able to at least bring some of its original arena's annoying tendencies with it into Nightreign, as it spews a toxic sludge around itself that at least provides it with some form of defense. But really, that's about it, and this is still an incredibly easy fight that can scarcely keep up with the speed of Elden Ring's world. Next up, well, we are continuing with the legacy bosses for now, as we have the Smelter Demon from Dark Souls 2. It's funny, I feel like the Smelter Demon used to be a legitimately tough boss in Dark Souls 2, and certainly the Blue Smelter Demon had a horrible run back to contend with. Here, though, again, like the bosses that placed before it, the Smelter Demon is just an enemy out of time. In a cool twist, the Nightreign variant combines the original and blue Smelter Demons, creating honestly one of the most visually stunning night bosses in the entire game. But ultimately, I mean, this is a very straightforward, very limited fight. All the Smelter Demon can really do is charge at you and swing his sword in wide, sweeping arcs, potentially culminating in a jump attack where he plunges his burning sword into the ground, which causes a torrent of fire to rush towards you. The attacks are very well telegraphed, they're slow moving, and extremely easy to avoid. I quite like this version of the Smelter Demon though. It's very low risk, but it's oddly satisfying and harkens back to a time where delayed attacks and incomprehensible combos weren't yet the norm. And next on the list is, you probably guessed it, the other returning boss from Dark Souls 2, the Duke's Dear Freya. While this enormous two-headed spider exhibits many of the tendencies of the previous legacy bosses that make them so easy to deal with, it's a huge, hulking, slow-moving target whose moveset is not only incredibly stiff and limited, but very basic. Freya does have a few tricks up her, or sleeves, I guess, that make her just a tad more annoying to face. For starters, she's surrounded by an army of spiderlings in a way that always felt like a precursor to Rom in the worst ways. While the spiders themselves aren't too bad and should really just be ignored en masse, the reality is it's easy enough for one of them to get lucky and land a hit here and there, or maybe jump and grab onto you. Secondly, Freya herself is, for all intents and purposes, invulnerable, save for her heads, which somewhat mitigates the fact that she's a massive target. And then finally, there are Freya's web abilities which slow your character down egregiously, essentially forcing you to fat roll, which is always frustrating to deal with. But on the whole though, this is another legacy boss that's just incredibly easy to overcome. Okay, but next up we're actually moving away from the legacy bosses for this one. The next easiest boss on the list is Wormface, which is a rare example of a gimmick fight among the night bosses. Now, I think if you don't really know what's going on, maybe it's your first ever time fighting this boss, it is definitely possible for Wormface to kill you. But once you figure out the trick to this fight, there's really no reason to die at all. Wormface itself may be the main target, but this boss also spawns in all manner of other creatures to face you. Rats, giant crabs, zombies, and more. Because the trick to this fight is that Wormface itself is constantly emitting a noxious gas that causes death blight to build up. And if you let it, you'll die immediately once the bar is full. However, that's where the other creatures come in. Killing these creatures will almost always drop rejuvenating boluses for you to consume. Not only instantly removing your death blight build-up, but also permanently increasing your resistance to it for the rest of your run. While Wormface itself is fairly weak, as long as you ensure that you at least take down some of the creatures every now and then, this shouldn't be a problem. But I also fully accept that this is maybe the first real boss that was absolutely the easiest with Iron Eye. Up next is the Demi-Human Queen and Demi-Human Swordmaster duo. Probably the easiest of the night bosses originating from Elden Ring that isn't a gimmick boss. Still, it's possible to get caught off guard here. The Swordmaster in particular comes out the gate pretty fast, initiating leaping and striking attacks against you with a fairly crazy speed, essentially as soon as the battle begins. Playing this fight solo definitely tones down the aggression, and that's going to be a theme that we see throughout this video, and so I'll usually attempt to kill the Swordmaster as fast as possible before focusing on the Queen herself, who is then surrounded by her own minions once she goes ballistic at the death of the Swordmaster. Overall, it's a pretty straightforward fight, and neither of the bosses have much health or utility. The battlefield commander might look intimidating as he conjures up several exile soldiers to take you on all at once, but the reality is, at least as an Iron Eye player again, you can ignore them all and focus your fire on the commander himself right from the off. It takes him a long time as well to summon the soldiers, which is a huge opening in itself, but crucially, this version of the boss is missing the incredibly aggressive second phase, and as such it's fairly easy to just maintain a distance between you. He has a few area of effect attacks, but again, fighting from a ranged stance in particular makes it so you don't even have to see them, while using a melee Nightfarer definitely puts you within the commander's reach more often. Even if you do have to take down the exile soldiers, these are weak enemies who can be killed in 1 or 2 attacks, and so shouldn't really pose any trouble. The Knights Cavalry duo is a pair of imposing, sinister knights who ride atop cloaked, hellish black steeds. Honestly, their designs are awesome, crafted to strike terror into the hearts of those who glimpse their form through the dark of the night. Sadly, especially when playing solo in Nightreign, this duo boss barely puts up a fight, and is one of the easiest night bosses in the game. Playing solo means only one of the riders is actually truly aggressive at any one time, and no matter which of them it is, whether it's the one who wields the flail or the halberd, the reality is their attacks are incredibly limited, well telegraphed, and safe to avoid. Once you break their stance and send the warrior toppling from his horse, it's easy to then deal a debilitating amount of damage from which they truly struggle to recover. With one dead, it's then simply time to repeat the process again. Up next, the infamous Tibia Mariner is back, and he's brought some friends. Honestly, this is another fairly simple night boss, with the only real issue being the fact that those who live in death will continue to respawn unless you destroy their corpses for good. Something that is way more annoying than it needs to be with a ranged character, by the way. The Mariner sails around the area, occasionally teleporting and summoning in a gigantic skeleton spirit to blast you with a laser beam, which if you get caught in can be pretty nasty, but aside from that he's fairly simple to take down, while avoiding the undead warriors. The most interesting part about this fight is that the Mariner always summons a Deathbird. If you kill him before he actually summons it, it will just appear upon his death. There's no getting around it, because it's an integral part of the boss itself. The Deathbird, while ostensibly fighting you, is extremely passive, because its actual role in the battle is to help you destroy the corpses of those who live in death with its huge area of effect attacks. It's a cool layer to the battle, and the music is incredible too. Okay, up next we have the first trio boss fight on this list, the Tree Sentinel and his Royal Cavalryman. A trio boss might look scary at first, especially if you're playing on your own, but in reality there isn't that much to be worried about. Ironically, especially when playing solo. Only one enemy will likely be aggressive initially, and it's probably going to be the Tree Sentinel himself. Meaning if you know how to defeat a Tree Sentinel, you should be fine here. And sure, Tree Sentinels can have some hefty attacks with, let's face it, dodgy hitboxes to boot, but ultimately this shouldn't be an issue. Once the Tree Sentinel is down, the cavalrymen will both charge you with their lances, but again, once you've avoided them, only one will be aggressive until defeated, and they have a fraction of the health the Tree Sentinel had. Here, it's a similar story to the Knights Cavalry. Knocking them off their horses is so crippling that you've essentially got them beat at that point. I think the first Day 2 Night boss to appear on this list, the Great Worm, is an interesting boss in that it feels like it should probably be tougher than it is. And don't get me wrong, if you are clipped by this giant creature's glaive, it's going to do some serious damage. But the Great Worm suffers from many of the same issues that the earlier bosses on this list have. It's a behemoth, but it's slow-moving and predictable, and some of its attacks, such as where it lifts its glaive with both hands only to slam it into the ground in front of it, have little to no reach. But, on the other hand, some of the wider glaive swipes have enormous range, while the Great Worm's second phase sees it rising to its full height, and even rolling about the arena. Here it certainly becomes a little more intimidating. That being said, the Great Worm is pretty bulky, so you're in for a lengthy fight no matter what. Godric the Grafted, or maybe it's Godefroy, returns seeking revenge. Yes, the Grafted Monarch is essentially just Godric, but without the second phase. In its place, the grafted monarch can instead utilize the aspects of the crucible transformations to swipe at you with an incredibly long dragon's tail. Frankly, a deceptively long tail at that. For the most part, though, this is a fairly straightforward boss. The grafted monarch employs his usual highly delayed axe swings before rolling and leaping at you. If you're too far from him, he'll instead conjure the power of the storms to send spiraling typhoons of wind at you, which can be slightly annoying to dodge. All things considered, I feel like the grafted monarch is emblematic of the average night boss experience in the game, hence why he finds himself at roughly the halfway point of the list. What's worse than a single Crucible Knight? How about a Crucible Knight paired up with a golden hippopotamus? Weirdly, the golden hippopotamus is the only boss from Shadow of the Erdtree featured in Nightreign, for now anyway, and honestly it is so much easier and less frustrating to deal with here. The hippo has several fairly predictable attacks, including a charge grab where it tries to snap you up in its jaws, and a few hefty head swings, but that's really about it. It completely lacks the second phase from the DLC. Meanwhile, the lone Crucible Knight is, well, a Crucible Knight. Powerful, demanding sword swings, a shield bash, a few nasty combos, the aspects of the Crucible, you know the drill by now. The Golden Hippo doesn't even appear until the Crucible Knight hits half health, and again playing solo makes this duo far less aggressive overall. Up next, it's finally time to return to the legacy bosses, and this time it's the Dancer of the Boreal Valley from Dark Souls 3. Despite being one of Dark Souls 3's most famous bosses, probably most beloved bosses, the Dancer feels a little underbaked here almost. But still, her elegant, flowing strides and sweeping sword slashes means that she can cover a lot of ground surprisingly fast and can be upon you extremely quickly, catching anyone unaware off guard. Again though, her moveset feels very limited, and to be honest there's only one move you really need to look out for. Once she draws her ashen sword from the ground and begins rapidly spinning across the battlefield, bringing both fire and ash down upon you in huge, blazing arcs, you definitely need to be dodging and reading that and getting out of the way. Ultimately though, the Dancer I think does feel somewhat neutered, and so as long as you can avoid that one devastating move, I don't think she has too much else going on. The Nox Dragonkin Soldier is yet another boss that looks intimidating, but once you have a grasp on what it can do, there's not too much to fear. The first half of the fight is extremely simple, as this colossal beast drags itself around the arena, swiping at you and even rising up on its back legs for just a moment before it comes crashing down in a move that feels like it has one of the craziest reaches in the entire game. It's quite a spectacle. Even though it's also one of the most heavily telegraphed, making it fairly simple to avoid. Oh, also at the start of the fight, the Dragonkin soldier almost always unleashes a bellowing roar to get the ball rolling. And this is a chance for some real free damage, pretty much every single time. Once the second phase begins and the Dragonkin soldier unfurls its wings, it crackles with a pure white lightning, flying into the air and flinging bolts down to the ground. While you don't really need to worry about the bolts themselves, they illuminate a path on the floor in front of them, which is what you need to avoid, as it's then struck with additional lightning blasts. That's really the entire gist of this second phase, but once you get here, the boss can kind of feel relentless, all the same. Up next, we have another common mini-boss from Elden Ring, the Ulcerated Tree Spirit. This is a weird boss in that while it's not particularly difficult, there are aspects to this fight that make it irritating to deal with. The Ulcerated Tree Spirit's enormous size and rapid movements make the camera your worst enemy here, as when locked on especially, it's possible for the Ulcerated Tree Spirit to come flying towards you, writhing and wriggling madly and taking up the entire screen. Aside from that, the Ulcerated Tree Spirit has a grab attack where it rises up into the air like a snake before launching itself at you, as well as several abilities where it breathes golden fire, either at you or it conjures huge torrents of it from the ground around it. And then it has the usual basic blunt attacks too, a tail spin and a move where it rapidly smashes its head onto the ground. I've said it before, in the last video in fact, but the ulcerated tree spirit is emblematic of mini-boss design in Elden Ring in that it has everything. And it's crazy to see really just how much utility it actually contains. Now, next on the list is a weird one. The difficulty of a lot of these bosses, as noted earlier and throughout this video so far, it does vary depending on which Nightfarer you're using for the run. But I've personally not experienced such a big disparity as with the Ancient Dragon. This titanic dragon proved incredibly difficult when I fought it with melee characters, yet with the likes of Iron Eye, it was much simpler, as you can just keep firing arrows directly at its head from miles away. In fact, it was Ancient Dragon that sold me on the benefits of using Iron Eye in the first place. All you have to look out for are the dragon's, again, fairly well telegraphed attacks, and once it enters its second phase again, there's not much to worry about. As a ranged character, save for its Crimson Lightning Tridents, which are again fairly simple to avoid once you're able to move quick enough to get behind the dragon and then get away from it once again. The fire breath can be annoying as it spills across the entire ground, while the aerial strikes are again predictable and well telegraphed, but as a melee character, where you have to get up close and personal and put yourself in harm's way, this becomes a different story entirely, as you spend the whole battle trying to hack away at this thing's back legs. Plus, the Ancient Dragon has a huge health pool, which only exacerbates the problem, to the point where it barely feels fair to fight solo as a melee character. Honestly, it would be higher on this list, but it's just nowhere near as tough when playing as a ranged character. Alright, at last we've reached the end of our Dark Souls legacy bosses with the infamous Nameless King himself, straight out of Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3's toughest boss still manages to be the hardest of the legacy bosses, but perhaps that isn't saying too much. The Nameless King is unique within the world of Nightreign, however, as being the only night boss, at least I think, to have two distinct health bars. One when he's riding atop his Drake, the King of Storms, and another once you kill the Drake, and it essentially initiates the second phase as he's forced to face you himself. As mentioned in my previous video, the Nameless King simply doesn't feel as strong as he once was, but he's still capable of dishing out a lot of damage, as well as moving quickly around the arena to unleash a lightning strike or dive at you with his huge weapon. In many ways, the Nameless King absolutely feels like the precursor to some of Elden Ring's dragon abilities, especially in the way he mixes lightning into his arsenal. But speaking of draconic enemies, up next we have the other trio battle in the game, the Draconic Tree Sentinel and his Royal Cavalryman. This is, for all intents and purposes, exactly the same as the earlier fight, except now, the Tree Sentinel has had a substantial upgrade. However, I've fought the Draconic Tree Sentinel so many times now in Nightreign that I feel like I can pretty comfortably take them on, but there's no denying they are considerably more dangerous than their earlier counterparts. The Draconic Tree Sentinel simply does so much damage now and has incredible versatility. The horse's fireball attack is one of the most frustrating attacks in the entire game to avoid successfully, as it definitely seems to have some level of input reading going on, while the Sentinel himself can charge red lightning strikes at the halfway point of the fight. He's even capable of calling upon his men to charge you, or conjuring cavalrymen's spirits if they're both dead already, to do the same again. While playing as Iron Eye, or one of the squishier characters in general, this boss is capable of one-shotting you with ease, so you always need to be alert. Right, but with that, we move into what I believe to be the upper echelon, the highest tier of the absolute hardest night bosses in the game. These are the night bosses where, at least as a solo player, I wasn't necessarily sure I could get through the encounter without at least spending my free revive. Up first is the Valiant Gargoyle, which sweeps and swoops around the battlefield, moving at an alarming speed considering its size and smacking you about, first with its axe, but then when the second phase begins, it starts using and spinning its halberd instead. The Valiant Gargoyle is incredibly strong and deals a lot of damage, making for a stressful encounter, especially for a day 1 night boss. Really, this boss is here relative to how hard it is for being a day 1 fight. That being said though, even though this boss is tough, the variant found in the crater is considerably worse, and even then they're just a toned down version of the dreaded Black Blade Kindred. Though thankfully that isn't a night boss. Over the course of my almost 100 hours with this game, I've only ever encountered the full-grown Falling Star Beast as a night boss once. And yeah, it's fairly tough. This boss stampedes around the arena with its weird bug-like mandible wide open, ready to snap you up or simply crash into you head first, dealing enormous damage. This boss has an absurdly massive move pool, featuring various physical strikes, such as tail swipes, charges, stomps, and head smashes, while even throwing rocks at you from a distance. Once the second phase begins, the full-grown Falling Star Beast channels gravity magic, unlocking an entirely new array of abilities for it to use. At this point, the boss causes spikes to erupt from the ground around it, and is able to fire gravity-based projectiles capable of crossing an entire arena. This boss can even conjure a gravity well that lifts you up into the air, rendering you totally defenseless. Like the Valiant Gargoyle before it, there's a variant found in the crater, perhaps to make up for how little this boss actually appeared before me as a night boss. Just missing out on the top 5 is the Fell Omen, Morgott himself. Fell Omen is tough, with a varied arsenal of both weapons and attacks, as he conjures throwing daggers from afar, or swaps between a halberd and a hammer when up close. The Fell Omen is another boss that can do just about everything, from conjuring a violent blast of fire around himself that erupts from the ground, to striking from the sky with a rain of glittering golden swords. Eventually he imbues his own sword with a crimson flame and swings it, leaving an afterimage of scorched burns in the air that soon burst into a fire themselves. Fell Omen is difficult, even more so as a night boss than as his own raid, and I toyed with placing him in the top 5, but ultimately more annoying bosses ended up winning out instead. So, taking the 5th place spot is the Outland Commander, the considerably more frustrating version of the Battlefield Commander we mentioned earlier. Now, maybe the Outland Commander shouldn't be quite this high on the list, I'm not sure. But from the perspective of a solo player predominantly, this guy can be a nightmare. He conjures a pair of banished knights to fight you, but the key here is that it feels like all 3 enemies are constantly aggressive. They all come at you together. The aggression is dialed up from the get-go, regardless of whether you're alone or not. And the banished knights are so annoying. They're constantly in your face, and they're simply not as quick and easy to deal with as the exile soldiers. They can't really be an afterthought, even though I try my best to face this boss without taking them down. The main issue though stems from the fact that not only are they up in your face all the time, but they can deal real damage. Meanwhile, the commander himself is no slouch either this time, with a true second phase that sees him unleashing both frost area of effect attacks and springing at you from across the entire field with a lightning strike attack that again does a lot of damage. This fight commands your attention from all angles, and is a genuine pain to deal with alone. Alright, but in 4th place, we have the terrifying Bell-bearing Hunter, who was originally sitting comfortably within the top 3. However, in literally the last few days, I feel as though I've gotten to a stage with him where I can kind of take him on alone, and I don't feel petrified to do so, at least outside anyway, in a more wide open space. The Bell-bearing Hunter under the castle? Nah, I just don't think it's worth it, to be honest. Anyway, the Bell-bearing Hunter is constantly trying to close the gap between you using his shoulder barge that exposes the shield on his back and makes it difficult to injure him. and will then, once he gets close enough, unleash his admittedly really cool weapon, a broadsword that he can control telepathically to enhance its swing and reach with a red glow, to deal massive damage even when he's not yet directly upon you. Highly relentless and constantly aggressive, the bell-bearing hunter feels unstoppable as he advances on you. Uniquely, this boss doesn't seem to have a guaranteed stagger state either, meaning in the case of Iron Eye specifically, he can just tank right through your ultimate art. Most bosses will get kind of blasted back or knocked back even a little bit. Not so with the bell-bearing hunter, he just keeps on coming, which is a little bit frightening. Like I said though, I've gotten a bit better at dealing with the bell-bearing hunter recently. It's kind of a boss that I feel like you just need to throw yourself at until you've eventually understood how he works. But he's still a terrifying sight when he's out patrolling Limveld. Also, this guy is a day one boss on the very first expedition. The hell is up with that? Anyway, as we reach the top 3 most difficult night bosses in Elden Ring Nightreign, well, again, I went back and forth between them all in my mind, over and over. And originally, things looked a little different. Like I said, the bell-bearing hunter was here at one point. At this specific interval, this moment in time though, I've currently placed the infamous Royal Revenant here at third, one of the most frankly despicable, despised mini-boss enemies of Elden Ring and a genuine pain to fight. Of course, typically, the Royal Revenant is plastered all over the place in Nightreign and can be found wandering the fields, underneath the main castle, within the depths of Noclateo, or yes, as a night boss. The Royal Revenant is capable of moving absurdly quickly, springing with the agility of a spider as it launches itself at you, slashing away with a staggeringly fast, unforgiving string of strikes, all the while able to then teleport and reappear in your blind spot. The Royal Revenant can, with little warning, unleash a stream of poison from its mouth, which will also deal serious damage to you if caught in the attack, before it likely follows up again instantly, bearing down upon you with a genuine mad ferocity. As is the case with Royal Revenants in the base game, if you have someone on your team who can use healing incantations, that will seriously damage the boss. But as a predominantly solo player, and certainly one who prefers melee, generally speaking, over magic, well, I kind of just had to try my best. Sometimes the Royal Revenant will spend time away from you as it kind of readies and builds an explosive attack, and honestly, that's a very valuable opening to take advantage of, as they don't come around often. And so when it came to first place, the hardest night boss in the game, again, I was conflicted. I went back and forth. But, much in the same way, as I feel a little better about taking on the bell-bearing hunter these days, well, that's also how I feel about my eventual second place pick, the Deathrite bird. This bird can be an enormous pain to tackle, and is another enemy with a ton of different moves. So much utility. It leaps and flies about the arena, stabbing at you with its poker before then swinging it to unleash a river of ghost flame that goes forwards for some reason. It has a grab attack too that comes out fast, where it pins you to the ground with its beak before pecking violently. As the second phase begins, the bird unleashes several area of effect ghost flame attacks, such as a variety of spears that rain down from the sky, or a sea of ghost flame that spreads across the entire ground. The Deathrite bird is very aggressive and unforgiving, and can quickly overwhelm you, not just with physical attacks, but with the additional damage the ghost flame does as it ignites and burns, chipping away at your health. Again, though, I have begun to find the Deathrite bird to be a little more manageable as a solo player, and his moves are, for the most part, fairly easy to read, but there's often a lot going on here, and again, this thing can do just about everything. It can strike from afar, it can zone in on you, it has enormous, potent area of effect coverage. Plus, that grab I mentioned earlier is capable of killing an Iron Eye from pretty much full health. So there's that to take into account too. Honestly, this would have been number 1. But again, I've improved at taking him on. Plus, holy damage absolutely shuts these unearthly abominations down, before you finally send it packing back to whatever dead and decaying pit it crawled out of. But in first place, yes, they're back again. It's the Godskin duo, made up of the Godskin Apostle and the Godskin Noble. Everyone's favourite Elden Ring boss fight that I'm sure we were all glad to see returning in Nightreign. In all seriousness, this is the most difficult duo fight in Elden Ring Nightreign bar none, and it's not even really that close, and I think at least as a solo player, this is the most difficult night boss in the game. Look, when fighting them solo, at the very least, one is less aggressive than the other, allowing you to focus in on one of them, and I usually attempt to tackle the Noble first, as I simply think he is the tougher of the two to fight, whether he's jabbing at you from a million miles away and still somehow hitting, or inflating himself to roll around the battlefield, ending in an enormous black flame explosion. Perhaps he's flinging an input reading ball of black flame at you from afar, or even unleashing a new area of effect ring of black flame around himself that prevents you from getting close, making life even harder for melee characters. Again, look, the benefits of using a ranged character are obvious, but still. Meanwhile, the Apostle uses his twin blade to slice you up, rapidly spinning it while carving through the air, stretching his body like a serpent to coil across the entire battlefield in a single move. While predictable and fairly well telegraphed, I just find these moves difficult to read and prepare for some reason, and the same kind of goes for their black flame explosions too. But either way, the Godskin duo is back, and they are one of, if not the single toughest night boss you can come up against. Alright, but that's it for today's ranking video. As always, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. To be totally honest, while I've got a definitive first place here today, the top 4 or 5 night bosses on this list are all pretty similar, and they're all pretty tough. They feel fairly interchangeable. Maybe it could be the bell-bearing hunter who happily takes the first place spot for other players, and I would totally agree with that. I would totally understand it. But for now, this is the list I've gone with. But as always, like I said, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Am I off base, or are our lists fairly similar? Let me know your own personal criteria too. How are you judging these night bosses? Like I said, for me, predominantly, this is from a solo player's perspective, and someone who mostly used Iron Eye, although I do have experience with a lot of these bosses with other Nightfarers as well. But even so, this is how my list has ended up. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, consider hitting subscribe down below for more content and to stay up to date with the channel and to help us get to our next goal of 15,000 subs. I really would appreciate it. But until next time, I'll catch you later, and let's talk games again.